I was going to say, I think sometimes it's difficult to accept our own pain and, let's say, some of the more difficult parts of life, and then not go into this idea that I'm oppressed in this society as a person of any domination, and then also try to live in your own agency, that you can create that change if you want to. I think there's a lot of men that can reach out and be more open and try to connect with other people, because it can be hard as men to connect vulnerably in a way that comes from a really heart-centered place. I know even some of the guys that I'm closest with, I think that's, you kind of step into there a little bit, but you don't get too far very often. I've learned to at least be able to gauge, okay, this friend is just not comfortable in this zone, and so we're going to stay here. And if I see they're struggling with something, well, then maybe I'll knock on that door and see if they'd like to open it. And equally, I probably would share less with that person because I realize that it would make them feel uncomfortable, and I probably also would not get what I needed sharing more vulnerable parts of myself with that person. It doesn't mean I love them any less. It's just kind of reading a room. So I think this area is kind of difficult for men because you don't know who you can and cannot reach out to. Whereas women I've spoken to have said quite comically, like, yeah, we start there. we're at a yoga class, we go out for coffee, and then I'm telling them how my boyfriend said something very hurtful to me last night, or my mother is sick, or something like that. And I found that really, obviously, funny to start there, but also from all the research I've read, this is just how people connect. If you want to be closer with someone more quickly, you will just share something more vulnerable and just be open, and it kind of gives the green flag to say,
absolutely,
oh, this person is open to share and to not hide their pain or their shame, and I can have this free-flowing exchange of experience and dialogue. Honestly, I would speak to our pre-call that turned into a monster conversation that was like, maybe, I know, bordering on 2 hours. I had to run to a haircut, and you and I exchanged a couple of emails being like how much impacted us in different ways. I thought about it for weeks, and I don't think that's possible if both people are hiding behind what they think they have to bring to a conversation. And I think a lot of men I've spoken to on this really struggle with that, and I've seen that.
Yeah, and I think it has consequences in so many different directions. But just thinking through in terms of our research findings, so one area of risk that we find for men is around feelings of failure and feelings like you haven't met the standards of success or expectations for what a man should be in your society. And those feelings of failure are sort of internalized as something damning of you as an individual. And I think that because women do more of that sharing, like I experience feelings of failure and low self-worth, self-esteem, but because I'm speaking to other people in my life, I know it's not unique to me. I know that all of the women in my life are experiencing that as well. So I think I'm less at risk of taking that idea of failure and saying, this is about me. This is something uniquely condemning about Susie as a human being. Whereas men, for example, that aren't doing that sharing, aren't hearing those stories of failure and struggle from within their peer group, for example, are more at risk of taking those ideas of those feelings of failure and saying, this is about me. And then also, Michael, it is so exhausting pretending. It's really tiring. And there's another thing that comes up in our research of men, because it doesn't feel safe to expose their feelings of failure, they then, for some men, will take on this kind of performance of self, where they're portraying to the outside world this sense of being somebody happy in control with their, life together, whereas internally they're having a very, very different experience. And so not only is it exhausting presenting to the world that you're okay and trying to keep those feelings down, but it can be so isolating and distressing,
Right.
as that kind of chasm between how the outside world is making sense of you, or you think they're making sense of you, and how you're feeling, you know, on the inside. So there's all these different repercussions that come, that may in some ways feed into increasing men's risk, because there is a very gendered aspect to suicide in almost every country in the world, where we see men dying at higher rates than women, in almost every country of the world, and certainly in the UK, since suicide records began in 1861. Every year since, there have been more male deaths by suicide recorded. So there has to be a question about why are men specifically at such particular risk? And there are lots of different factors, of course, that may contribute to that, some of which will be, you know, potentially biological factors, and some will be potentially around these cultural ideas that everyone is socialized in about who men should be. This is something else that I think is really important, is it's not just, this work isn't just about men thinking about the implications of those ideas, but all of us thinking through those implications of those ideas. Because certainly that's what I found as a woman doing this research, is understanding that the way that I've been socialized to think about men, I think stopped me being curious about them, stopped me being curious in the same way as I was about the women in my life, about what their experience was.
Right.
And that's, you know, it's such a sort of suffocating space for someone to inhabit in when people have stopped being curious about you.
Yeah, I would agree with that.